We are back on Inside Politics. Our guest today, Dr. Thomas Schwartz of Vanderbilt University, history and political science professor there. We're talking about foreign policy and what's going on with the new Biden administration. Dr. Schwartz, you mentioned that we talked about COVID-19 before we took the break. While it may be declining here in many developed countries, it's raging out of control and has been for weeks in India, Vietnam, and other places in the third world. Therefore, it remains a worldwide threat, and therefore, because of world travel and new variants, it could still be a threat. So is the world doing enough to stop the spread of COVID-19, or at least to contain it?
It doesn't seem to be. I mean, I'm making a judgment here solely on what I read in the reports and the rest, but there needs to be a greater effort. This is a worldwide phenomenon. The United States kicked into gear, and now life is beginning to come back to normal. But I think the requirement will come that, and this could be an area where the United States could lead, with trying to vaccinate the rest of the world, or at least get ahead of this virus in places where it is raging. So I do think this is an area where President Biden, if he chooses, can exercise real leadership. The
president's already making available the excess vaccines that we have in this country. I think there's millions of doses, but is that enough? Does the U.S. have to do more of the sort of the infrastructure to get that done in these countries?
It may require more. I mean, the United States, I think, certainly could probably do more, and may simply find itself needing to do such, because I think we're still connected to the rest of the world's economy. We still need, in that sense, the ability to have international travel and international trade. And so in that sense, it'll be in our interest to do as much as possible to contain the pandemic in other countries.
President Biden's already seen a renewal of a shooting war between the Israelis and the Palestinians. These folks have been at odds and fighting off and on for years. What made it restart up again, and why did it take so long to get a ceasefire in place?
This is an interesting question because, of course, there were some incidents, and there was particularly this eviction question that went on in East Jerusalem. But the decision by Hamas to start launching rockets against Israel is an interesting one because, of course, it brought with it intense Israeli retaliation. It might be the case that given Hamas's connections to Iran, it might be the case that this was a way by Iranian hardliners, for example, to prevent the restoration of the Iran nuclear deal. That's speculation, of course, but Hamas's decision is still, Hamas also was trying to make a statement about its own role as the dominant Palestinian leadership organization against the leaders in the West Bank under Fatah, the slightly more moderate Palestinian leadership in the West Bank that had just canceled elections. So I think we'd have to look more deeply as to what the reasoning might have been of this organization, and to consider the possibility it might be related to broader issues of Middle East politics, and particularly Iran's role.
For several days while the fighting was going on, the Biden administration declined to publicly call for a ceasefire. They even seemed to stop the UN from making a similar call. What was behind that strategy?
Well, I think the Biden administration recognized, and I would argue quite rightly on this, that Hamas's decision to launch rockets at Israeli cities was something that no country would tolerate. The United States certainly, were rockets launched at us from Canada or Mexico, would pulverize any attempt to do something like that. So I'm not surprised that they were reluctant. They wanted Israel to be able to retaliate against the attacks by Hamas. And so I think in that sense, Biden is on something of a tightrope, given the fact that there are significant groups within the Democratic Party who are less committed to Israel than might have been in the past, and we're more critical. But I think he reflects a more traditional view of the Democrats that Israel has the right to defend itself and that the United States should help it to do so.
The U.S. was deeply involved in the negotiations that led to the ceasefire. Is the ceasefire likely to hold? And was the role of the Egyptians perhaps more key than what the U.S. did?
I think it was key. It is an interesting role. The Egyptians, of course, once ruled over Gaza. People sometimes forget that, but it was a part of Egypt for a time. The Egyptians have significant influence. The Egyptians also wanted to get in on the good side of President Biden. It is somewhat controversial given the repressive government in Egypt and human rights violations there, but their role in producing the ceasefire obviously earned them some credit in Washington. So they had a self-interest as well in trying to end the conflict. And I do think the ceasefire will hold for the time being, since so much destruction was rained on Gaza that it might be difficult for Hamas to collect itself to fight again.
A final issue to deal with briefly, there have been reports that the opposition parties in Israel are now joining together to try to remove longtime Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from office. There have been multiple elections in that country, but they haven't been able to come up with a change in that. What impact could this have on peace and on American foreign policy in there if Netanyahu goes or if he stays?
I think we overemphasize Netanyahu as a personality. He certainly is a significant personality. He certainly has shaped U.S. and Israeli relations over the last 12 years. But to a certain extent, I think he has exhausted his role. If he were to go now, especially if it was a coalition that was largely led by a right-wing leader, more conservative than he is, I don't think it will produce a great deal of change. It may lead to a period of political instability in Israel for a time, because I think this coalition will be very fragile. But I think it would be a mistake to think that Netanyahu's removal will suddenly open the doors to peace or to a different U.S.-Israeli relationship.
Dr. Thomas Schwartz, thank you so much for being with us. Always enjoyed having you on the program and bringing such insight about foreign policy in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's Inside Politics for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you can be back here again for a future show. If you can't get enough politics in the meantime, go to the NewsChannel 5 website. You'll find my Capitol View commentary there. There's a new commentary posted every Friday afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you here next time. Goodbye.